Do not panic. Do not move. This is a nationwide announcement. Do not leave your home until further notice. If you have a loved one who is outdoors, do not make any sort of contact. They are most likely infected. Lock all doors and windows. Keep children out of sunlight and in shadows. Do not let them see you. Red lights will be used to inspect homes. If the light senses movement, it will destroy your home along with you and your family. Your safety means nothing to us. It is up to you to survive how you like. If you choose to live, follow our laws. 1. Stay silent.
These identical twin sisters were pure evil. In the quiet town of Bloomsville in 1952, there were two identical twin sisters named Taylor and Dory. They seemed like ordinary, sweet girls, but behind closed doors, they were evil. One day, a new girl named Mary Jane moved into the neighborhood, and the twins grew jealous. Mary quickly became popular, and the attention shifted away from them. The twins didn't like that. One evening, they invited her to a tea party in the woods. The next day, Mary was reported missing. Weeks passed, and rumors began to swirl. The town grew suspicious, but no one could prove anything. Until one night, the twins' mother named Anaconda heard them whispering in their room. She pressed her ear against the door. What she heard sent chills down her spine. "We need another one. Mary wasn't enough." Terrified, their mother opened the door to confront them, only to find the room empty, except for two dolls on their beds. Identical dolls with the faces of her daughters, and a third one with Mary's face, staring right at her. The twins were never seen again. Some say they still live around the area in the forests, looking for their next victim.
I want to know what is up with the Appalachian Mountains and the Appalachian Trail, because I have seen so many TikToks about like these rules that you have to follow if you're in the mountains or the woods in that area. Like this picture behind me is a picture that a hiker took in like 2006, just like of a bunch of weird rock formations that were put together. And like, sure, a person could have done that, but it's still eerie to see that when you're hiking by yourself in the middle of the woods at night. These are some of those rules that you have to follow that the locals hound into your brain. And I've seen so many people who go on TikTok who live in the area who talk about like, it's not a game, like it's not like to scare you, like genuinely this is what's going to keep you safe, because there's things in the woods that you don't want to interact with. I need to know stories. Like I want to hear people's stories of like what they've seen or experienced in these woods.
You don't know the dark truth behind Peppa Pig. Hello, I'm Peppa, and this is my story. I was never a healthy child. My mom struggled with addictions that started before I was born, which gave me several birth defects. I was born with both eyes on one side of my face. I couldn't walk or do almost anything for myself. My dad hated me for it. He blamed me for him never being able to do anything in his life besides taking care of me. He hid me in the house and never let me leave. He thought it was only fair that I didn't get to have a life either. He became very mentally ill after being in the house with me for several years. One day he snapped and wanted to make me normal. He tried to make an eye hole for me on the correct side of my face. That night I passed, and he didn't tell anyone what happened. After 6 months of my brother Georgie and my mum asking what happened to me, he snapped again. He took himself and both of them to the afterlife with me.
This American woman killed 300 people in one day. In the quiet town of Goobersville, Indiana, in 1949, a woman named Aileen G. Anus was the beloved lunch lady at Sunnydale High. For 20 years, Aileen served meals with a smile. But one morning, she had other plans. She laced the school's water supply with a colorless, odorless poison. By noon, students and staff began collapsing. Chaos erupted. The hospital was overwhelmed. Parents rushed to the school in panic. As sirens wailed, Aileen calmly walked home, humming a cheerful tune. The death toll rose to 352 lives lost. An entire generation of Sunnydale gone. Aileen was found in her kitchen, baking cookies and listening to the radio. Her only words upon arrest: "I was saving them from the pain of living." Investigators later discovered 20 years' worth of journals detailing her plans. The Sunnydale massacre remains one of the deadliest single-day killings. In 1954, police decided to investigate her home more. They decided to break the walls, and what they found there was truly horrifying.
There was a woman named Mary who had a 19-month-old baby girl. She loved her baby deeply and couldn't wait for her to say her first words. One night when Mary was cooking dinner, her husband called her out into the living room. He told her that their daughter was trying to say something. Mary was so excited and watched her daughter try and say something. After the baby mumbled for a bit, she said, "Mommy dies." Mary looked at her husband in complete confusion, thinking she heard the baby wrong. But by the confused look on his face too, he heard the same exact thing. Mary and her husband then laughed it off and went on with their night. The next morning, when Mary was on her way to work, she got into a fatal car accident. She was then rushed to the hospital where her husband and daughter were waiting for her. When Mary's husband and her daughter found out the room Mary was in, they went in. Her husband was devastated and didn't know what to do. He couldn't imagine living life without his wife. But suddenly, Mary's daughter pointed at her and said, "Mommy dies." Seconds later, Mary's heartbeat stopped as she died from her injuries from the car crash.
This man caused an entire state to go into lockdown. In 2003, a man named Ben Doberman went on trial for the disappearances of over 52 people in Washington state from 1974 to 2002. Ben, who was described as being over 7 feet tall, but weighing only 140 pounds, was often seen walking along the highway late at night, dressed in a suit. Many well-meaning drivers would pull over to offer him a ride, unaware of his dark intentions. In 2002, however, a truck driver accidentally struck the towering man and drove off, not realizing what had happened. The next morning, Ben was arrested after seeking medical care for his injuries at a nearby hospital. Due to growing suspicions and evidence tying him to the string of disappearances, Ben was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Yet, in 2009, during a routine morning roll call, the guards discovered that Ben was missing from his cell and nowhere to be found in the entire prison. It wasn't until they inspected behind his Scooby-Doo poster that they realized what had happened. The prison warden immediately contacted the governor of Washington, leading to a statewide lockdown.
Hey, Apple! What?
A girl named Danielle emailed me her story time about her living experience a few years back. And this story is absolutely wild. It's chaotic. It's creepy. It deals with blood magic and polyamory and substance abuse. So trigger warning on that. Danielle did want to be anonymous, so her name has been changed. But after reading her story, if you follow me on Insta, you saw my post when I read this email because it's terrible. And I feel genuinely bad for what she endured. But we're calling this story The Blue House. At the time the story took place, Danielle was dating a guy named Bill. Bill and Danielle had triplets. They were toddlers at this time. She had 2 boys and 1 girl. They had their hands full. And the place that they were renting at the time, I guess the owner got into some legal trouble, so they were forced to move very quickly, unexpectedly, with no savings, so they had nowhere to go. Danielle and Bill are frantically looking for a place for their little family when one of Danielle's friends, this guy named Cody, who she'd known for over 10 years, reaches out and he's like, "Hey, why don't you and Bill and the kids come stay with me? We have room at my place." He had just gotten married to a girl named Kaya, and Danielle had met her a few times. Danielle and her family move into a spare bedroom in Cody and Kaya's apartment. It was a small place, but everybody got along pretty well and they were making it work. Bill and Cody became fast friends, and Kaya and Danielle bonded over their mutual love of cooking and witchcraft. At this point in the email, Danielle did say that she is a self-proclaimed witch. She says at this point, everything was very blissful, even though it was a small space, and after a few months had passed, they decided that they were all going to look for a bigger place together. She didn't really want to pay more for rent because she was a waitress, and Bill mostly stayed home with the kids, so it just worked for everybody. So they start looking and they find a standalone property and they tour it. The landlord is this like 90-year-old man, and they decide that they're going to rent it. It's perfect for their little setup. They tell the landlord they want it. He's like, "Great, all I got to do is paint." And they say because basically he was so old, they volunteered to paint it themselves. He was like, "That's awesome. I'll buy the paint. You just pick whatever color you want." And they decided on the color blue because it matched a bunch of furniture that Kaya had inherited from her grandmother. The place, after they painted it, was very like cottagecore. She said they loved it. It was very pretty. When they were done, the landlord comes over to check it out and fix some window trim. And they're talking to him and he says, "Yeah, I really used to love this house. I used to live in it, but so many bad things have happened here that I eventually just moved out and I moved into one of my RVs on my lake property." They're like, "What happened?" He's like, "Nothing that crazy. There's just like a lot of unlucky things. Like once I was fixing something and I sawed off my finger." And he shows them and he is missing a finger. He also says that he had 2 unlucky instances where he almost died in the house. And Danielle's like, "Well, that's weird. Like,
maybe a little bit too much information, but she said because she is a witch, she sensed that the house had very good energy, so she didn't think anything was amiss. As they're moving in and getting settled, they notice the house has an attic, so just being playful, they go up there to check it out. And she said that it was empty, but she sensed the energy in the house change the second she stepped in there. The air got cold, but it was also rural Alabama, so she wasn't that weirded out by it. It was just an old house, but that night she goes to sleep and she starts hearing knocking coming from the attic. So they go up to check it out and they think it's like a squirrel or a raccoon or something. They can't find anything. But every night they hear this knocking coming from the attic and they cannot find it. So they just chalk it up to being house noises. A few weeks pass and Kaya changes a little bit. She works at a seafood restaurant and she just stopped showering. All of them and the kids would hang out a lot as like a big group, so they would watch movies together, and the smell really started to bother Danielle. But she was friends with Kaya. She didn't want to be rude, so one day she pulls Cody aside and she's like, hey, I noticed Kaya isn't really taking care of her personal hygiene anymore. And Cody's like, oh yeah, like she decided she's going through this new thing where she decided that showering every day is bad for your skin, so she actually only showers once a week. He's like, I'm getting used to it too because she always has lice. And Danielle's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, like she's always had lice, like ever since she was a kid. She used to just like dye her hair periodically and it would kill everything. But now that she doesn't shower as much, like only washes her hair once a week, like it's just getting worse. Danielle freaks out. She checks her kids' hair. They all have lice. And she said getting rid of them was so time consuming, so traumatic for the kids, like everybody. It was just a lot to go through. She's kind of mad at Kaya about this, so she confronts her, and Kaya's like, well, when I do wash my hair, I use tea tree oil, which helps treat it. So like I'm working on it. It's just like a problem I've always had. And Danielle, in an attempt to be a good friend, tries to be understanding. But it's not long after that when Cody pulls Danielle aside one day and he's like, hey, I noticed that Bill and Kaya are spending a lot of time together. Keep in mind, Danielle is still a waitress at this point, and Cody also works second shift, so like night shifts. So Bill and Kaya are always at the house alone together at night. And after Cody tells Danielle this, she starts paying more attention and she starts seeing that Bill and Kaya, sure enough, are having this weird close relationship all of a sudden. Like they cook meals together, they take trips to the grocery store together. She said it was almost like they were role playing being husband and wife with Danielle's kids. Even though Bill was staying home with the kids, Kaya was the one bathing them, putting them to bed every night, like tucking them in. She was playing a mother role. And Bill would spend his evenings playing video games, watching movies, just basically like chilling out, even though the reason he wasn't working was supposedly so he could stay home and take care of the kids. Danielle addresses it with Bill. He's dismissive. He's like, no, I take care of my kids. Like, what are you talking about? And also during this time, Kaya is buying new books on spell work and ritual magic. And one day she brings up to Danielle the fact that she wants to do a blood ritual where you put blood in wine and you drink it. It's sort of a marriage ritual, as Danielle explained it to me. Danielle says immediate red flag. She was like, absolutely not. We're not doing that. And Kaya's like, why not? You're my girlfriend. And Danielle's like, what are you talking about? I'm not your girlfriend. She says there was no sense of like niceness in her voice. She was very firm. She's like, I'm not your girlfriend. Kaya senses Danielle's resistance and she drops the subject. During this time, Danielle's daughter, the one girl in the set of triplets, also starts behaving a little erratically. She starts drawing all these strange shapes. Danielle said she didn't know where she got those shapes from because it wasn't something that she previously knew. And she starts distancing herself from her two brothers. Instead, she's playing with an imaginary friend she just calls the boy. Danielle's daughter becomes obsessed with drawing these strange shapes all over everything. And so Danielle's like, where did you learn this? Like, did Dad teach you? Did Kaya teach you? Did Cody? And she's like, no, the boy did. Danielle says one night they're all asleep when her daughter wakes her up. Her daughter is in bed with her and Bill, and her daughter's playing with her phone, which is like not that abnormal. I have a son. He loves to grab my phone whenever he can. So it's not that weird. She looks at her daughter. Her daughter's filming a video, just like zooming around the room and doing normal baby toddler things. So Danielle grabs her phone back. She stops it and she plays the video back, and she sees her daughter has panned all over the room and then stops on the open cracked door facing the hallway. And from the hallway, you hear a little kid's voice. And the little kid's voice was calling her daughter's name. She says it was absolutely not her son's, and immediately she knew she had to cleanse the house and protect her child. She says immediately the next day she goes out, she gets anointing oil, she gets cleansing stones, she gets the things that she needs to cleanse the house. I don't know too much about this. I'm just going off of her email. She says she feels good about it. She leaves it alone. She goes to work the next night. When she comes home, her kids are all usually sleeping, but she walks into Kaya sitting in the middle of the floor with candles lit, doing a ritual from her new spell book with her daughter on her lap. Danielle absolutely freaks out, loses it. She grabs her daughter and starts screaming at Kaya. Bill hears the commotion. He comes out, and he actually takes Kaya's side and starts defending her. Cody gets home, and they are all arguing, screaming at each other. It is tense. At this point, I did ask Danielle what she thought Kaya was doing with her daughter in the spell book, and Danielle says she fully believes that Kaya was doing a love spell on Bill, using his blood, aka their daughter. A few weeks pass, they're still in this lease all together, and things calm down a bit. So one night they're all trying to squash their problems. They decide they're going to watch a movie together. They're having a few drinks, and Kaya says, hey, have you guys ever thought about wife swapping? Like, maybe we should all have a foursome. That was the final straw for Danielle. She loses it again. They all end up arguing, fighting, and it doesn't stop. They keep arguing, and eventually her and Bill break up, and Cody and Kaya break up. Cody cannot defend Kaya's actions, and Bill keeps taking Kaya's side. But it's tense. Kaya moves out first, and she's trying to convince Bill to go with her, but Bill ends up in jail. I can't say the reasons why. They are too graphic for this app. I will have the full uncensored story if you're nosy or if you're just curious. The links of that are in my bio. I'll probably have the full uncensored story uploaded tomorrow. So then it's just Cody, Danielle, and Danielle's kids in the house. Danielle eventually moves into her dad's house with her kids, but then the things don't stop there. Her daughter starts telling her that she actually has a different mom, who's her gray mom. Her daughter says, yeah, she has gray skin and she was my mom before you were my mom and she doesn't like you. But she said her daughter ultimately grew out of it and her triplets are 10 now. She says she doesn't think she remembers, but they've never heard this story. Danielle ended her email by saying that she has a weakness in that she tries to see the best in everybody and everything, and that a lot of times she'll let things play out before actually accusing someone of something. But she says ultimately that no matter how much she loves somebody, when it comes to her kids, they come first. And if they are in harm's way, she's going to remove everybody from the situation. Danielle is no longer in contact with any of these people, but she says she still fully believes that Kaya did spell work on Bill and Cody. And she says she's done protection work on herself and her kids. But considering everything they went through, she says that she feels like they came out relatively unscathed, which I admire her strength because with everything she went through with Bill, he apparently threatened to unalive her and himself and the children, among other things, and it just got crazy. But as always, I appreciate her for sharing her story. Keep sending me your spooky, scary, weird, crazy roommate stories. I'll keep adding them to this playlist. The link to the other channel is in my bio where the uncensored story will be posted.
When I was a kid, I had a very nightmarish experience at my childhood home. My family moved to this house when I was like 4, so I really don't remember anything of the house we lived in when I was born. We lived in what I call my childhood house from when I was 4 to when I was 14, so exactly 10 years. I loved that house. I have very good memories from growing up there. We moved out of state when I was just beginning high school, which was a nightmare in of itself, but that's nothing to do with this story. In the backyard of my childhood home was a tree house. It was built by the previous owner for his kids. Believe it or not, when my parents viewed the house, a major selling point was the kid-friendly nature of the house and the backyard for my older brother and I. My brother Kyle is 2 years older than me, so he was 6 when they bought the house. And my brother and I apparently were very excited over the treehouse aspect in the backyard, according to my parents. My brother and I would play in the treehouse with friends we'd made over the years. But as the years passed, I would stop playing in the treehouse like that at a certain age. By the age of 12, I was obviously not playing in the treehouse anymore, but I was admittedly a troublemaker around this age, and I would often get in trouble with my parents. I'd get grounded often, and in general I'd just throw a lot of temper tantrums and there would be a lot of yelling in the house. One weekend, my dad grounded me for a repeat complaint from my guidance counselor about my behavior and grades in school, and like an angsty, annoying preteen, I thought I hated my parents at that moment. That night, I refused to sleep in the house. I took a couple blankets and pillows and went outside to the treehouse to sleep up there. It wasn't the first time I'd done this, and my parents would know about it when I'd do it. They didn't care. It was my little way of rebelling. Little did my dad know that I had my Nintendo DS with me, even though I wasn't allowed to play video games or watch TV. I played Animal Crossing for literally hours before getting tired and eventually going to sleep, but I think I was only asleep for a few moments. I don't think I even entered REM sleep yet when I woke up to a voice from outside calling my name. Tommy. Tommy. I was still confused as I was waking back up. It could have been my dad's voice. Tommy, are you up there? The voice said. All I remember is it being a deep, grown man's voice. I didn't reply. My heart started to race for some reason. I heard the steps of the ladder squeaking as someone was coming up. And then, in the near pitch black darkness, I saw someone poke their head through the opening in the floor. I couldn't see their face. I just saw the shadow of the outline of their head. He said, "Ah, there you are." I replied, "Dad?" But this was where he stopped responding entirely. For about 20 seconds, I stared at this head that I presume was staring back at me. I was waiting for my eyes to readjust to the darkness, but something told me that that wasn't my dad. I stood up and went to the window of the treehouse and started screaming "Dad" as loud as I could. I saw the light in my parents' room turn on, and I also heard footsteps hurrying down the ladder to the treehouse. Moments later, my parents burst outside through the back door, and my dad swore to me that he wasn't out there playing a prank on me. My parents believed me. It wasn't like some stupid horror movie where the parents don't believe a word the kid says. My uncle was still an active cop at the time, and so my dad called him for advice, and my uncle made a report on the incident the next day. Not much information I could give besides I heard a deep man's voice and saw the outline of his head, and that he knew my name. Not much the police could work with. Obviously, I never spent a night in the treehouse again. My dad for a while thought it was one of the neighbors directly across from us, but he could never prove it. For years, whenever I'd see him outside and he'd say hi to me, I'd try to think back to the voice from that night, but I just couldn't remember it clearly enough to make a comparison. It still remains a very unsettling mystery in the back of my mind.
Mother and her children are home alone when this is captured. Her son suddenly burst into her upstairs bedroom, screaming and crying, saying that somebody was in the house.
He gets up around 7 a.m. every day. He decided to make some noodles, which he told me that he was making for lunch to take to school. He said that he heard a voice coming from the cabinets that said to him, "How did you find me?"
As Tony tries to get her son to calm down, they both hear the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the stairs.
Jumping all over my bed, hiding in the corner, screaming and hollering, saying he didn't want to die. Somebody was in the house, somebody was in the house. And I'm like, calm down. So then I call my dad. I'm like, "Dad, man saying somebody in the house." At the point, my dad was like talking to him, telling him to get out the room or to be quiet. And he finally did get a little bit quiet. We started hearing footsteps. I mean, big, heavy feet coming up the steps.
So she begins to search the house, wielding a hammer. After finding that all the doors and windows are locked, he begs her to check the security cameras because he swears up and down that he heard a voice. Tony decides to wait till he goes to school to check the cameras. What she found is truly chilling. A voice can be heard, clear as day, saying the words, "How did you find me?" But the most frightening part about this story is that days later, her son received his Xbox after being grounded. When he logged into Xbox Live, there were 2 messages awaiting him from a random user, and the words read, "How did you find me?" After discussing these frightening occurrences with the neighbor said that the elderly woman who used to live in the home died in the house, and after doing their own research, Tony's son actually did confirm this. To make matters worse, Tony says that when they moved in, there was something strange left in the home.
Bro, I really think that spirit came off that dollhouse. I think when we moved that dollhouse upstairs and sat in the kitchen for a little bit and took it out and put it on the porch, that the spirit was on that dollhouse because the kids did not want to touch that dollhouse. Like, it was something about the dollhouse.
And she can't help but think that they disturbed a spirit by moving it. Now Tony's son refuses to sleep in his bedroom and will not be left alone in the house. What do you believe?
Do not leave me, please. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, please. I'll do anything.
When he logged in, I think it's like some messages or something, like, you know, like you could text back and forth with like your friends and stuff. I don't know, I'm not familiar with that stuff, but he called me into his room, and guys, he showed me a message where someone messaged him on the 4th and said, "How did you find me?" And on the 8th, literally somebody texted the same thing, "How did you find me?"
I'm fucking lost. I'm scared.
My mom survived a serial killer, and this is her story. Okay, so my mom was attending college, and she was walking out of the library when a very handsome man with a beard approached her. It was raining really hard, and he complimented her cute polka-dotted umbrella. Anyways, they strike up a conversation, and he mentions that because he's a photography student, he notices things like cute umbrellas, he's got an eye for it. But the university my mom is going to, they had a dress code, and beards were not allowed for students to have at that time. And so she had a little red flag like, if he's a student here, how does he have a beard? So the conversation's winding down and he offers to hold her umbrella and walk her to her car because her hands were full of books. She says that she really didn't want him to walk her, like she just had this weird feeling, but felt awkward saying no, so she said yes. As she starts approaching her car, she said that her stomach started getting the butterflies, and it's like she just knew not to go to her car. And I think it's worth mentioning, pausing the story right here, because I work for a nutrition company and I learned that your gut has 500 million neurons and your brain has 1 billion or 100 billion. I don't remember. Okay, I just looked it up. 100 billion neurons are in your brain, 500 million are in your gut. And that's why they call your gut your second brain, because they are totally connected. So if you have a gut feeling, you have to listen to it. So they're walking in the parking lot and he's asking, okay, so which car is yours? Which direction do we walk? And my mom just can't take that feeling in her stomach anymore. She goes, oh shoot, you know what? I just remembered I have to meet up with a friend. No need to walk me to my car anymore. I actually have to go back to the building. She then says that he acted a little bit annoyed, but he smiled and asked if he could call her later. That because it's close to finals week, he had one final project where he needed to photograph somebody and thought that she would be perfect and that he would love to connect with her. Now, my cutie mama is the biggest people pleaser you will ever meet in your entire life. Maybe that's where I get it from. And she couldn't say no. But instead, she decided to come up with like a loop around where I just moved into my new apartment, so I don't remember the new phone number. But if you can look up my parents in the phone book, you can call them and then we can connect. Now, my grandma and grandpa have very unoriginal names. There's at least 10 people with the same names in the phone book. So she figured, one, he's probably not going to spend the time looking in the phone book, and two, he's not going to figure out like which number is theirs. So my mom scurries off and thinks that she's avoided some weirdo, but didn't really think much of it until later that night.
When I was a kid, between the ages of 14 to 16, me and my friends were really into hanging out anywhere other than our houses. Most of the time, we would go to some fast food place and chill there, or just find some spot in the woods near the park. I guess we were at that age where we wanted to be alone and not have people looking over our shoulders all the time. The only problem with this was that on the weekends, when we'd be out late, most stores and dining areas closed before we were ready to call it a night. During winter break one year, we ran into this problem a lot. We'd go to the parks to hang out, only to find that even in the late hours of the night, there would be multiple other groups that had the same idea. Then one night, my friend JT brought up his parents' old farmhouse, saying it could be a cool spot to explore and that nobody else would be there. He'd mentioned it a few times before this, but we never thought much of it until that night. JT drove me and my other friend, Paul, out into what looked like the middle of nowhere, arriving at a wooden fence. The fence was closed off with a chain, since it was a private property, and JT didn't have the key to it, so we parked and hopped over it. From the edge of the wooden fence, though, the first thing I realized was that I couldn't see the farmhouse. Yeah, it was dark out, and there were no lights anywhere, but I couldn't even make out the shape of the house in any direction. JT started walking, leading the way on a rough gravel path, as he explained why his parents even had the place to begin with. He said it was his grandparents' farmhouse, but when they died, they passed it down to his parents. Apparently it was in horrible condition, and his parents didn't know what to do with it, so they just kept it. That was almost 10 years ago. Nobody had done any maintenance, or even checked up on it, in over a decade. We walked down this path, following JT for a good 10 minutes, before we could finally see the house. Even from just the outline of it in the dark, you could tell it was in bad shape. Part of the roof was dipping inward like it was about to collapse, and some of the siding panels were hanging from the wood. All of us were quiet now, just looking at it as we walked closer. When we got up to the front of the house, the door was covered by a large sheet of wood, so we went around to the back, where the door was completely missing. We each turned on our phone flashlights and stepped inside. Surprisingly, the place wasn't really trashed like we thought it'd be. Most of the furniture and stuff didn't seem to have been moved very much. It was extremely dusty though, and our phone lights were not the best, so maybe it just looked better than it was. We split up after a minute, just walking around the first floor and looking. I entered a hallway on the left side of the house and began walking down, when suddenly someone walked past the end of the hallway. I froze, and out of panic, I called out JT, as if it was maybe him, but I already knew it wasn't. The man I saw, although it was dark, was much taller and thinner than either of my friends. I stepped back and started to go where I'd last seen the two of them. When I turned around the corner and held up my light, both JT and Paul were standing in the middle of the room, looking away from me. I stepped into the room and looked where their lights were pointing. At the edge of the light, the man was standing and staring right back at them. It was like they were all frozen in fear, unsure of what to make of the situation.
Guys, let's just leave,
I said shakily, but trying to act calm so the guy didn't do anything. But that must have triggered everyone's reactions, because suddenly, we were all sprinting to the back door and running out into the open field. I can't even say for sure if the man chased us out, but JT says he was confident he heard footsteps right behind him. We pretty much ran straight back to the car and drove off, not taking any more risks. I think we can all assume that the man was just a squatter or homeless person defending the place he calls home, but without a good look at him, it's hard to say for sure. JT said he'd tell his parents about it so they could lock down the farmhouse, but he never went through with it because he was worried about getting in trouble for going there. Whatever happened that night remains the most horrifying experience I've had, and if JT was right and the man was trying to chase us, then we got really lucky to have all gotten out unharmed.
Scary story time while I reactivate this slime. Oh my gosh. I get my money's worth, so get yours. Yeah. It just looks like I put a whole bunch of glue all over the table, bro. Ghost in the Backyard edition. Like, So this happened when I was in elementary school. I was definitely a little kid, and I remember I was in my room at the time, and I was doing something with my sisters. I cannot remember, but I was at my dad's house. And I remember that room always gave me the heebie-jeebies at nighttime because it was just creepy. I don't know. But I loved being in it in the daytime because of the windows, right? The way this room was kind of set up was that I can see kind of half of the front yard and then the backyard, right? I can see that. Now, I remember minding my business with my siblings and then seeing a man walking along the sidewalks in front of the house. Now, this man kind of had his head down and he looked like he was minding his business. So I'm not thinking it's a big deal. Time goes on, my sisters go to their room, and I completely forgot that this man walked by, right? I'm chilling next to my window, and next thing you know, I see this same man that I seen earlier in my backyard walking around my dad's garden just in circles. He did 2 or 3 times. I'm looking at this man, full on staring at him. He doesn't make eye contact with me once, and then I see him kind of walk in the direction where my window is to kind of hide behind our playhouse. When he ducked behind the playhouse, I ducked too. So I duck, and I'm kind of peeking over my bed through my window. I see him get up, make direct eye contact with my window, walk into this corner where this old tree was, and he's just there. He's out of my view. So I immediately run to my dad. I'm like, Dad, there's a creepy man in our backyard. You gotta get him. He's creepy. He was just in our backyard. So obviously concerned, he gets up, he goes to the backyard, he checks all the places where I tell him to check, and he's like, look, there's nobody back here. What are you on? There's no one back here. And I'm like, no, there is. He went behind this way, just tripping off of it. I know some people are gonna be like, okay, where's the scary part? This is not scary, y'all. To describe my old house and its backyard, we had this huge fence that you couldn't climb up unless you had some type of assistance. You needed assistance to climb this wall. So everybody's looking at me like I'm crazy because what are you talking about? There's nobody back here. And I'm just trying to explain myself I promise I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. I'm not gonna say they didn't believe me, but I feel like they definitely thought I was tripping. I remember in that same night, I seen this man standing by my bay window, and I was terrified, and I hardly ever slept in that room again. So that's the scary part, and no one believed me. And I know a lot of y'all don't believe my story times, but I couldn't make this up, y'all. That man was in my backyard, and I seen him, I can still remember every detail about this man to this day. Bye.
I work at a CVS open 24 hours a day. I've been working at this location for 3 years now, and I'm one of the higher-ups. I agreed to take on the overnight shifts because I believe it helps my chances of getting another promotion, and I like to be on my boss's good side. There would only be one employee working the 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, as that's all that's really needed. Once the pharmacy opens at 9 a.m., that's when business usually picks up. The 2 employees before me left after I was set up. At my hours, so few customers come in that my job varies from cash register to simply stock working. The beeper at the front door that would go off would alert me when a customer would enter, so I'd know when to go back to the register and wait. A few hours into my shift, I went back to the register to check my phone, which I had charging, and I had a new voicemail from an unknown number. I pulled it up and listened. It was some weird voice on the other end that I couldn't tell belonged to a male or female, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. Like, the sound quality was terrible. The transcription was unavailable for that reason. Obviously, I just ignored it because everyone gets weird calls once in a while. As I continued doing stock work, my phone started to go off. I pulled out my phone and saw a bunch of texts from that number that just called. The first text said, "Call back when you can." The second one said, "I know you're at work, I'm coming to visit." The third one said, "What time are you working till?" I had no idea who this could be. I texted back, "Who the hell is this?" The typing bubble popped up for like 20 seconds, then it went away. They didn't respond to that. Okay, a little unnerving, yes, but I still had to go about my work. Eventually, I heard the ding by the front door, alerting me someone entered, so I went back to the register and waited. I didn't see anyone walking around though, and I waited there for quite a while actually. Eventually, I just decided, okay, that's enough waiting, and went back to stocking shelves. I'd say it was around 2 a.m., a couple hours into my shift. I got a new cart full of items from the back section, this time beauty products, the second aisle in the store. I brought the cart over there and noticed a woman in the corner of the next aisle over, the first aisle. I stepped into that aisle and looked down, asking if she needed any help. She was looking down at one of the products in the corner. She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't know if she heard me or not, but I just felt awkward, so I left her alone. I walked back to the register just to wait there for her to finish up, and then I started getting more texts from that number. I was basically getting spammed with random messages that made no sense, except one that said, "I'm here." So I said screw it and I called the number. I heard a ringing sound coming from inside the store, and my heart started beating twice as fast. I felt a heavy feeling in my throat. I canceled the call, and the ringing stopped. I brought myself to walk over to that last aisle again, where the ringing was coming from. That woman was still there in that corner. I yelled, "Joke's over, I'm calling the cops, whoever you are." I almost knew it had to be some girl I knew playing a prank on me. I went back around the counter because for some reason I felt safer there. I really didn't want to call the police though. Instead, I called my best friend, who picked up on the first try. I asked him to think of anyone we knew with brunette hair who had my number and would be playing a prank on me like this. He guessed a few names, but based on the body shape of that woman, it was none of them. My friend told me to just stop being a pussy since it was a girl. I told him, alright, whatever, and hung up the phone. I was about to suck it up and walk over there, when I noticed her, peering half of her head from around the corner of the beauty aisle. She had to be kneeling down too, because the shelf in that aisle is lower than the rest. The first thing I noticed was blood trickling down her cheeks. She was smiling, and I heard her making these fucked up laughing sounds. It looked like she cut the skin on her cheeks right next to her lips, and this was when I realized she wasn't our age. She looked like she was anywhere from 30 to 40. I took one step closer, and I recognized her. It was this lady with serious mental issues who had DM'd me with a fake account before, and as far as I knew, she was dangerous and was supposed to be in some psychiatric center. She must have gotten my number through my Instagram, which I have set as a public figure profile, which includes my phone number. Seeing half her bloodied face peering at me, smiling, made me want to yak. I yelled at her to get away or I'd stab her. Of course, a complete bluff. I ran to one of the back aisles and hid from her, and I only sighed a breath of relief when I heard the beep of the front door go off. I went to go check if she was still there, but she wasn't. And so I called 911 and had the police take a report, showed them the CCTV footage, and warned them of her name and that she had serious mental issues. The officers were very nice and told me they'd be in the immediate area in case she returned. I blocked the number she was texting me from, and I like to think the police contacted her family,